The most interesting thing to me has always been to find connections between things that people might not see as connected, and kind of proving that they belong together, or that they can belong together. Because I think that automatically creates also something of interest and prevents that you repeat yourself once you found something that works, which is, a trap that a lot of people fall into.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, this is Morean from Alkaloid, and I'm greatly honored to be on this wonderful podcast.
And Morean, how would you describe the music that you make with Alkaloid?
Ourselves, we are using the term extreme progressive metal, and maybe that bears some explaining because, well, many of us have a background in death metal, in brutal death metal, and in technical death metal. But when we founded this band, we wanted to step away a little bit from that niche because, sure, we can play and we are famous for it, but we didn't want our music to be about technique. This band is all about songwriting, and it's basically a composer's collective where everybody gets to do what they want. And our tastes are broader than just, tech death or whatever. So the band to us is a vehicle to explore any musical direction we want, which means that we feel more at home with the prog moniker than with the tech death moniker, because also, prog is a term for everything and nothing. So just to give ourselves the maximum freedom to do whatever we want in the future, we call ourselves a prog band, but at the same time, we never want to lose the heavy side of the band, because you will see that with a lot of prog bands who maybe originally came from heavier music, and as they explore the proggy sides of their music, they tend to lose the heavy component, and we never want to do that. So that's why we refer to Alkaloid as extreme prog metal.
And in this exploring the progressive side or your progressive influences and your influences outside of metal, would you say that you also draw from a lot of classical and jazz and music like that?
By now, yes, actually. And there is never a conscious decision ahead of songwriting, we're going to go in this direction or that direction, because we want, as I explained, we want to keep the freedom to react to whatever the muses, bring us. But through the course of our albums, it became obvious that there is space in our music for unexpected elements. And on the last album, Numen, we had a couple of actual jazz parts thrown in there, which are mainly in the songs that Hannes, he happens to be really good at jazz drums as well, which not many people know. And he just, I think, chucked in like a little jazzy section here and there, and I love it to death. I was so happy when I heard his demos and heard that there's moment of actual jazz happening. And we very much approach our metal basis of our music with this open mindset, so that at any time we can feature, like, for example, in a track like Colonel Panic, the opener of our second album, it starts like a song by Yes, 80s Yes, yeah, basically. So a completely new sound for us. But then the whole point of it is to go, fluently into something that sounds more like Morbid Angel than prog rock. And in that vein, we like to surprise ourselves as well, as much as the listeners. Whether we throw in, something classical and polyphonic like we did in the Bach project, or we throw in, 10 seconds of flamenco, or a little jazzy drum solo, or a gospel choir. All these things, I think, also define us because we try to go a little bit further than what we ourselves would expect from what we did before. And in that sense, yeah, the non-metal elements in our music will for sure always have an important function in our music, but they do have to relate to heavy music as well. Because it would be very tempting to say, okay, we make an all ballads album with no, heavy beats and no harsh vocals, but that would also mean that we neglect an important side of Alkaloid, which is that of a metal band. So yeah, we are ready to use whatever comes along, whatever spiked our interest, but it will always have to relate to metal in a meaningful way.
Can you tell me about your musical background? Did you grow up listening to a lot of jazz and classical and flamenco as well as metal?
Jazz, not at all. I'm from a rather conservative town in Bavaria in the south of Germany. And after I started guitar lessons at 12 years old, we immediately started a band. We couldn't play yet, but me and some friends, we got together and kind of learned together to write songs and to find our identity and to find our voice. And all that happened in a kind of isolated bubble out in the province, which was problematic in the sense that we couldn't really connect to a bigger scene. So the band went nowhere. We stayed a local band. But the good thing was that we had complete creative freedom. Like nobody ever told us what we could or couldn't write. And that was a very good basis to then later go into professional music. And in my case, I got obsessed with flamenco, Spanish music from the gypsy heritage, which is also fast and dark and rhythmical. And it has a lot of similarities to metal from a kind of fundamental point of view, what kind of music it is. So when I was 21, I moved to the Netherlands to study flamenco guitar at the conservatory, actually. And once I was there, my interest in classical composition just became bigger because I discovered so much incredible music, especially like 20th century Eastern European composers like Stravinsky, Shostakovich, Bartók, Ligeti. All that really resonated with me. So I actually graduated in classical composition, and I've been working for over 25 years as a professional classical composer, writing scores for orchestras, chamber music, the odd films, dance projects, like whatever came my way, but most of it is, let's say, acoustic concert music. And in parallel, I've always kept my bands going. So in a way, I was never pure neither as a listener nor as a player. And the more interesting elements I'm exposed to, the happier I am. So in a way, also Alkaloid as a metal band that is open to all kinds of things that you wouldn't expect, is completely in line with how I always perceived music, because there's so much awesome stuff out there. And sometimes you find the most incredible things that touch you personally in a culture that has nothing to do with your own. For example, in the conservatory in my first year, we had an obligatory lesson in gamelan. So that's Indonesian percussion music, which, is very remote from Western music. But there's a style of gamelan on the island of Bali, which is super brutal and super fast. And when we got to play that in school, I thought, man, this is Slayer, but on, some kind of kitchenware stuff. But it was so much fun to play, and you could approach it with the same fire that you would, play a Slayer song with. So in that sense, I always saw so many connections between things that are perceived as disconnected, especially in music and in art, that the most interesting thing to me has always been to find connections between things that people might not see as connected, and kind of proving that they belong together or that they can belong together. Because I think that automatically creates also something of interest and prevents that you repeat yourself once you've found something that works, which is, a trap that a lot of people fall into. And we just wanted to dedicate our work to finding things that haven't been done before. And all the while not becoming a purely experimental band that, put out stuff that doesn't make any sense. And that is carry a balance, I have to say. It takes a lot of work, not so much to find interesting stuff or to come up with, let's say, unusual ingredients, but to make sure that all these things work well together in something that is undoubtedly, an album full of metal songs that everybody can enjoy.
Yeah. And that's... The connections between classical music and metal music is one of the things I'd really like to speak to you about. It comes up a lot on this podcast when I speak to somebody who has a background similar to yours in terms of going to music school and studying composition and studying music outside of metal. When I was about 13 or 14, I heard the band Manowar playing a version of Flight of the Bumblebee, and maybe about 4 or 5 years after that, Emperor released a classical version of one of the songs from their first album. Mm. And so it was always on my mind that classical music and metal were never as far apart as people might think. And the difference is mainly the instruments used. Do you think there's some merit to that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I speak from experience as a composer of, a couple of decades now, who has tackled like everything that life threw at him. And my conclusion was exactly that let's say the border between genres very often is more a question of instrumentation than of the music itself. And I realized this many times because I've been fortunate to do a bunch of orchestral encounters with metal bands, whether it was Non-Euclid or recently Alkaloid with the Bach project, or even the Triptychon Requiem, in which I collaborated as a co-composer and arranger. The thing is, I have to add some nuance to the discussion, because many people say, oh, metal and classical music are so similar to each other. And in a certain sense, it's true. And I'll speak about that in a second. But I could also almost write a book about all the ways in which the two are absolutely not the same. Because it's a bit of a dangerous statement to put out there, because to me, a good encounter between classical music and metal is not the metal band standing there doing the exact same thing they always do, and then just for the looks of it, putting a string orchestra there who play like two notes while the band is, shredding themselves to death.
Right.
And that is very much how I saw for example, the Metallica orchestral collaboration. I was super excited about it because I used to be like a huge Metallica fan. And the concert starts, and the band goes as only they can. And I was waiting for the orchestra to join, because I know as a classical composer that the level of players in classical music is ridiculously high, and most orchestral musicians could play along with these crazy, thrash metal tempos. But the arranger chose to just put a little bit of orchestral ketchup over the songs as they are.
Right, yeah.
So that means that the orchestra just, while the band plays all these super tight 16th notes and, gallop forwards, the orchestra is just leaning back going, me, me. And
right.
As a composer, you can imagine how painful that is, because I hear potential and I hear all the things that could have been done with it. And I saw this in a lot of orchestral collaborations. I have to mention a few that I think are incredibly successful. And first and foremost, it would be Dimmu Borgir, because they had still have an incredibly capable arranger who managed to find space for good orchestral parts in the midst of this ultra full triggered, concrete block of extreme metal. So it takes quite a lot of skill, and you need to know exactly what you're doing. And a similar thing you can see in bands like Flesh God Apocalypse or Karach Angren, who have also professional composers in their bands. Also Septic Flesh is another good example. If they work with orchestra, the orchestral part is really good because they have somebody who understands both genres. And I think that's what it takes. So the fusion is not as easy as it might seem on the surface. And sure, there have been a lot of female-fronted kind of gothic metal bands who employ the classical sound of the voice. And sure, there is a relation there. But if they take the music, you take away the voice and you take away the songs of female-fronted metal. To me, it's more like pop with a little bit of distorted guitars, where you also see, okay, the heaviness of it has been sacrificed a little bit. And to me, what is most interesting is where in classical music can we find the heaviness of metal and take it from there.
talk about like pure or true or whatever, like there's an element to heavy metal when we say that it's heavy, where it needs to be ominous, it needs to be angry, it needs to be, all these emotions that you'll find in some classical music, but definitely not all. Classical music encompasses all kinds of emotions and feelings and purposes. And some of that anger and that ominous feeling gets lost, I think, depending on the instruments you use, or, in the example that you pointed out about the Metallica collaborations, trying to add something that maybe detracts from the heaviness. So I'm curious, in your approach, how do you keep that heaviness when you're adding classical instrumentation?
Well, that's a very good question, which I'm happy to talk about, but it's not going to be an easy answer. And just to maybe finish my thought from before real quick, you need to ask yourself the question, what is metal? And it seems easy to define, but it's not once you limit yourself. So, for example, if, like in our Bach project, we had acoustic instruments on stage. So that meant that if the metal band is at full blast, we're not going to hear much of the classical instruments anymore. But yet we wanted to prove these acoustic instruments are also metal. So we had to look for different parameters that make metal metal. And one of them, as you correctly also mentioned, is the choice of notes. If you choose dark tonalities or different scales than just the boring old major and minor for your riffs, it doesn't matter if you put them in a cello section in a classical orchestra or in a metal band, because the notes themselves have the essence of what I would call metal. And music history is full of examples like that. For example, the one piece almost everybody knows is Mars, the Bringer of War by Gustav Holst, which was written, 115 years ago or something. And the way that this piece starts, like snare drums and low strings and low brass going ba-da-da-dum, bum, ba-ba-bum, ba-da-da-dum, bum, ba-ba-bum, bo. Nice evil notes, nice riff, nice beat. This was 19 or something like that. That to me is pure metal. And it's not for nothing that exactly that piece was the inspiration of not just one, but three seminal metal tracks, them being Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. And Geezer Butler said that the inspiration for the tritone riff was Gustav Holst's Mars, the Bringer of War. And the same was true for Am I Evil by Diamond Head in the early 80s. And then just a few years later for the track Hell Awaits by Slayer. Yeah. And I mean, there you have three bands that really changed metal history. And each of them, at least in those songs, mention, this early 20th century classical music work as the main inspiration. And like this, there are other composers. And this is exactly, of course, as a metalhead, when I started going into classical music, those were exactly the composers that interested me, because Bartók, for example, has a couple of string quartets that, a couple of movements can only be called metal. The same for Shostakovich, the second movement of his eighth string quartet. We all know it. And, most metalheads that are a bit literate in music, arrive at the point that they feel forced to steal that because it's so awesome. The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky is another grand example. And you can even go further if you go into post-war avant-garde. If you have composers like Krzysztof Penderecki, for example, Polish composer, who used ugly, sort of horror-like blocks of sound, of clusters that are more evil than any metal band is managing to sound. Specifically a piece called Polymorphia. I recommend everybody to take a listen, put your headphones on, crank them in 11 and close your eyes and see what happens.
People may be familiar with Penderecki because the director Kubrick used a lot of his music in his movies like The Shining.
Exactly. So, which metal band could supply a more evil-sounding soundtrack than what Penderecki did? I mean, maybe a band like Portal from Australia could, because I adore them, just because every single noise that comes out of them is evil, and I love it. But you know what I mean. So, so that goes back to your comment that the term classical music doesn't mean all that much in terms of, what it expresses, because, most people know some Mozart and some Beethoven, and maybe, sure, there are some, bombastic parts from symphonies, but for the rest, people have this image of, nice, organized chamber music in major and minor, and, nothing too excessive, which is true for a lot of popular classical music, because, not everybody wants evil sounds when they listen to music. But the classical music I write and the classical music that made me go into classical music is of a whole different order. And sure, it falls into the same genre because it's all played on string instruments and wind instruments and whatnot. But musically, it's much, much closer to Slayer than to, some Mozart clarinet concerto. And of course, this is a matter of taste and of how you experience a piece of music. And maybe somebody, gets his metal kicks out of Beethoven and out of Rhapsody, and I get them out of Slayer, Mayhem, and Penderecki. So you see, it's a complex subject, which I love to speak about, but it can't be brought down to one sentence that is true or not, which is, metal and classical music are the same thing. Yeah, like yes and no.
Right. I understand. Since you studied guitar at a conservatory, do you always start your songwriting with the guitar, or do you use other instruments as well?
It greatly depends, and I'm speaking as a composer, not specifically as a composer of metal songs. Of course, if I write for guitars and I'm a guitarist, I will write it on a guitar. But nowadays, well, you have your digital audio workstation, your Pro Tools or whatever, you have it open, and I always prefer to leave the choice to my ears, even though I use my brain and my technique and my, knowledge of music theory and whatever to come up with material and to organize it or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's always the ears that need to judge if something's good enough or not. So I like to record everything. And if I write for instruments that I don't play, so drums or violins or trombones, nowadays you have orchestral libraries which are not perfect, but which go a long way in giving you a demo what it's going to sound like. So no matter who I write for, I always write kind of with my ears, and I do use guitars also to write just melodies for other instruments, just simply because I'm sitting there and it's standing next to me and it's the only instrument I know how to play. But the tools you use when writing are not necessarily defining how well it's going to work. It's just that, of course, if I write for guitars, I'll play it myself and I'll find the riffs on guitar. But sometimes it's good to also break through that, because the danger is that you end up writing what's in your fingers and then, you spin in very tiny circles doing always the same thing. So sometimes it's good to force yourself to take notes from somewhere else, or maybe, make chords on a piano and then find them on a guitar, because you will come up with slightly different chords than you would, just on the instrument itself. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a MIDI score in Pro Tools and a guitar that helps me a little bit.
Okay.
The more important thing is actually how well you know in your head what you want to write before you actually start looking for notes. That is where it's actually happening, because many of us know this, the fear of the white paper, so to speak. If you have all the options, it can be paralyzing to have to make a choice between everything. So I find it greatly helps if you have a good vision of what it is that you want to write, that can guide you through all these choices of notes, of sounds, of form, of whatnot, because then you always have a direction that is given. You give yourself a direction and then you follow it through this maze of all these possibilities, because as a professional composer, you can't really afford to waste a lot of time finding out what it is that you want to make, because you have to deliver, and every day you have to write a certain amount of music. So the plan before you actually take your guitar or your clarinet or whatever it is that you use is much more important than the question, what do you use to choose the notes?
Specific to your work with Alkaloid, I mean, obviously this latest release is a little bit different, but is the songwriting and the arrangements for Alkaloid fairly collaborative, or do you start everything on your own?
Well, theoretically it's collaborative, but in practice what we see most is that a band member will just write whatever they want to write, and then they throw it in the group. And usually we don't have a lack of material. The opposite problem, that there's too much stuff. So then it's about, what do we choose to put together on an album? What do we need? What is missing from the pool of songs that is there? And occasionally, for example, Hannes will get a song from another band member where he, as producer and engineer of the album, has a better view of how it fits into the total picture of the album as a whole. Or from his experience can just say, like, I think this song is a bit too short or a bit too long, and then sometimes he will insert something that wasn't there in the first version. Or we also collaborated in a way that Linus, sends us a bunch of songs, and then I pick one and I say, okay, I wanna try something with this song, and I add my own stuff. But this also usually happens remotely. So that means, we send stuff to each other, and then it's exactly what we're going to put on the album, which is usually the case. I mean, I'll add my vocals also to other people's songs, and I'll compose them. I'll write the lyrics and whatnot. But basically, people have a vision of how it should be, and then sometimes we give it another round to go over it again. But we don't write really together as much as we would like to. And with every album we say, like, okay, this time we really sit together and develop stuff together. But last time that didn't happen because of the pandemic, because we couldn't get together, for example, which was annoying. But well, then here we were again, just sending demos to each other and then finding out what it is that we wrote once everything was done and mixed, which is also nice. It's a nice surprise. But me as a guitar player, I would very much prefer Hannes to make his own drum lines, because as a guitarist, I can never make drum lines as good as what a drummer would make, but that would require some time to and actually develop it. So yeah, let's see if now that we're starting to write the next album, we can actually find a chance to do some things together. It would be awesome.
The demos that you submit to Hannes, how complete are they? Do they have temp drums and vocal patterns and things like that?
Yeah. What I write, I usually know very much in detail what I want. And for my own feeling, I also have to kind of finish the song in order to know that it's finished. It feels a bit weird if I have a very specific idea to just put half of it out there and then hope that the others are going to pick up on it. So yeah, my demos are with a drum computer, but for the rest, I play everything, and I make the sounds, I make the words, and at the end, how they're recorded is pretty much exactly how I wanted it on the demos. It's basically the same for the other writers. Usually they'll use Guitar Pro, which is a little program where you can easily make MIDI demos also of the guitars and everything, which is what a lot of people use. But I prefer to record my bits with the actual instruments, also because the demo gets better. It sounds more organic. And then I have a much better view of how it's actually going to work as a song, because this is the danger if you just program everything into MIDI. Even if you do it in a competent way, when the time comes to play the stuff for the first time, sometimes you see that it's super difficult or impossible, where it just sounded reasonable in the MIDI version. So yeah, there have been a couple of moments that we realized, maybe we went just a little bit too far here and there, and then you have to kill yourself to get it recorded. But on the other hand, that's also interesting because you force yourself to grow. It's always important to follow your musical vision, because the question, can you play it, is a bit secondary. Like for the composer, it's important that the right music gets born and is out there. And then we can look around if we can actually play it or not. But of course, ideally, what you write and what you believe in should be something that you can also show to people on a stage. And yeah, so there's a little bit of back and forth there. But again, what counts is the idea, not so much the medium with which you manifest it. As long as it, ends up on an album and hopefully ends up in a concert, it doesn't really matter how it came about.
Is the ability to perform this live and to bring this to an audience in person very important? Something that's on your mind a lot when you're in the writing phase? Or do you feel like some stuff can just exist in the studio?
Well, some things are definitely not possible that easily to play live. And we allow ourselves moments like this when we are writing, because the thing is, so we have, 3 studio albums, 1 live album now coming out with new material on it. And we are looking at a lot of songs that we're going to have to choose from the next album. And I want to write a bunch more as well, because the fun is exactly the writing. So we know that we're never going to play every single track from an album. It's when you put out your first album, you might be, and then you go play live, you might be forced to play all the tracks on your first album. But we are not anymore. We have the opposite problem, which is how the hell can we fit a good representation of everything we have done into a set list of 40 minutes, 60 minutes. So, any choice we make for songs that we play are always going to exclude songs that we would like to play as well. And plus, there's a serious aspect of preparation to learn these songs, because, we push ourselves to the limit, which also means that, the solos are crazy, and then sometimes the riffs are, require you to practice for months until you can play the song from A to Z. So yeah, in that sense, we don't worry too much, because we know that there's always going to be some songs that are going to be possible to be played live. So, for example, in my whole Dyson Sphere saga, which is like a multi-part ongoing series of songs that is, I add chapters to it with every album that came out. On the last album, there were 3 new songs, and the last one was so conceptual, where, the backwards version of the song becomes its own accompaniment and stuff like that. So, certain conceptual things I had to solve in a technical way. And I knew this is not going to work live. And I wanted a super low sound, so I used 8-string guitars. And you're not going to bring 8-string guitars just for one song. It's just too much practical misery to put upon yourself. So I knew from the beginning, we're probably not going to play that song live, but we can play the other songs live. And we just did. So you have an idea while you are writing the songs that, some things might not work live, but it'll never be that we are not aware of it, or that we, write a full album that cannot be played live, because that would be a bit stupid. On the contrary, we even took some songs from the Bach project, in which we had 11 musicians on stage, and started playing them just as a metal band in our regular metal shows. And that also works, because at the end of the day, music, like all music, is just notes, and the question is rather simple. Okay, I want these notes to sound. How do I get them to sound from the things that we have here? And it's a very kind of crude and simple approach, but it really works for me, because you make yourself independent of the means you have to say something. And of course, sometimes it's not possible. You can't have, a 15-part composition if you have 3 musicians to play it. You're going to have to sacrifice something. So in that sense, it's a diverse situation, and we have enough material to react to whatever is possible to do live. And if we can't play this song, we can play the other song, and hopefully all the songs are good. So it's not something that bothers us, but it is a factor, of course, when you write, to make sure that, at least there's a couple of songs that you can for sure play live.
So, as you mentioned, Alkaloid will have a new album out called Bach Out of Bounds, which will be released by Season of Mist at the end of the week. What was the genesis of this idea of this album?
It was brought to us actually from the director of the Bach Festival in Dordrecht, which is a small city close to Rotterdam where I live. And it's a yearly festival featuring the music of Bach. And as you can imagine, Bach's been dead for a long time. So with every iteration of the festival, they're looking for new things they can do with Bach's music. So that year, their idea was, can Bach be fused with metal? Or, is there metal in Bach, and is there Bach in metal? And I was very happy that they called me for such an endeavor. And basically, didn't tell me what to do. They just asked me, like, hey, can you come up with a program that combines Bach with metal? And I knew immediately that I want to do this with Alkaloid, because, you know, we're an outfit that on a good day is a well-oiled machine. We know each other really well. I know also, you know, they're crazy enough to go for something like this. So first I asked the band, and luckily they all said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And at the time, Christian Münzner was still lead guitarist of the band. And he even said, oh, Bach is my favorite composer, which, you know, was great to hear. And he immediately said also his harpsichord concerto in D minor is my favorite piece of his. So I listened to the piece and I totally saw what he meant. So when it came to choosing, you know, Bach pieces to play, that harpsichord concerto was top of the list, let's say. And for the rest, I knew, okay, we have the opportunity to invite some guests to join the effort, because, you know, just as a metal band, it's a little bit challenging to play all these notes in Bach's music, and you want to play the scores and the notes as he wrote them, right? Especially on a Bach festival, you need to have respect for, you know, for the master himself. So initially, I was hoping that maybe we could have a full choir and a small orchestra, so that we could tackle also some of his amazing big choir works, like from his Passions, for example, or from the High Mass in B minor. There are some of the most amazing pieces ever written, and the most complex polyphonies, you know, double fugues with 8 parts imitating each other, plus orchestral accompaniment and stuff. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, we saw that we can't have enough for that. So it became a kind of really like a skeleton crew for what we needed, with like 2 sopranos and 4 classical players added, which isn't nothing. And it was crucial to choose the right people. And luckily, I knew exactly who the right people are, thanks to my work as a classical composer. So it's my friends that I've worked with in a lot of very different projects, because I knew not only are they fantastic classical players, but they're also lovers of other styles of music. So each of our guests has something with metal, you know, like an actual interest to go into that style of music, which is kind of extreme. You know, you can't just expect from any musician to, you know, to play at 220 BPM, or to have half an hour of 16th notes. So I knew, okay, I have the right people. And even though we were, for what we wanted to do, a very small lineup, I could ask all the more from every individual musician. So my plan was not so much a collision between the 2 extremes, between Bach's music and metal, but I was more curious, is there a place where the 2 are together, so that we perform Bach's music and our own music in new versions, especially made for this orchestration, that feels like it all belongs together, and that the public isn't busy for a second with the question, is this old, is this new, is this classical, is this Alkaloid, is this, you know, is this metal, is this not? Because as a composer, I'm not interested in those questions. You know, the question to which genre something becomes, as you said correctly before, is often just a question of what instruments you use, because the same notes can work in a classical concert hall as well as in an electronic music thing, or in a metal band, or in a bar jazz version. You know, it's the instruments you use don't say that much about where the notes belong. And this is exactly what I wanted to use, that no matter if we play our own songs, or if we play, you know, 250-year-old stuff or more, that you hear a group of musicians that, you know, play together in a meaningful way, and that pass the ball back and forth. So not just that the metal band does the heavy stuff and that the classical people do the more lyrical stuff, but exactly that we exchange, and that it constantly goes back and forth, and that you make the question which instruments are playing what becomes a fluid thing. You know, that there is never this kind of barrier between the worlds. It's build bridges and tearing down the barriers. And I gotta say, I was quite pleased how that worked out, because from all the feedback we got, nobody said like, hey, this didn't fit. Or, you know, we didn't know also, because the premiere was on the Bach Festival. with, a Bach crowd mainly. I mean, of course there were metal heads and our fans came as well to see, but the rest of the crowd was Bach people. And we didn't know, are they going to, run away screaming the first time we turn on the distortion of the guitars? But to our delight, that wasn't the case at all. It was even that, some of the Bach crowd came to see other shows as well. And we are very proud of that because that's not a given. That could, I completely understand if somebody doesn't like metal or growls or, blast beats or whatever. This is a completely reasonable thing to not like that because it's extreme. But if you make the whole thing about more than that, this production, just being musicians open to play whatever we have to play rather than proving how brutal and loud we are with every note that we play really helped to transport the idea of the project, which is much more like an amalgamate that is more than the sum of its parts. And yeah, I was very pleased how that worked out. And maybe it was just that we didn't care if people have a problem with the project. We just did it and we just pretended it's the most normal thing in the world. And yeah, it kind of worked, I think.
When you performed at the Bach Fest, did you just perform the Bach compositions, or did you perform your originals as well?
No, we performed our originals as well, and the live album is it's not the entire program that we played. The program was a little bit longer, but what put the album, and not every track worked in that context of a live album, but it was integral to the project that Bach's compositions are interchanging with our own compositions. And what I did to our own songs was, our music is also layered, and it's also polyphonic in the sense that there's usually more than just one thing going on. And we used exactly that layeredness of our music to feature it with the extra instruments. So, for example, we had these wonderful two sopranos, which allowed us to perform multi-part vocals live. Or, there was a track, Alto Magnitudes, which is this, 4-minute blast beat inferno, where I replaced one of the rhythm guitars with the string trio. And in this way, you could tell that every musician was important, and sometimes in one song one was featured, and in another one I tried to also give everybody a break here and there because it was a lot of notes altogether. And I also wrote one entirely new song called Haunter of the Void, which is a 10-minute piece that uses Alkaloid's harmonic and melodic language, but uses Bach's composition techniques to manifest that language. Because that was the idea of the Bach Festival as well. They said, can you write a piece that sort of brings together the whole idea? So that became Haunter of the Void. And besides the Bach pieces, we could also seize the opportunity to play a piece that I wrote directly after I wrote Cthulu back in the day. It's called Beneath the Sea, and it was a song for big band and soprano originally, but it was a perfect opportunity to, if we're talking about more versions of our own music, of our metal songs, well, this was the perfect prequel to Cthulhu. So we could present the two as a 15-minute block that is all based around the same riff and the same kind of music, which was also a welcome opportunity to show ourselves from a side that we cannot show just on a metal album or in a metal show. And another example of that is the Agnus Dei, the penultimate track on the album, which is a Bach piece from his High Mass in B minor, a very quiet, sort of ethereal, ephemeral, beautiful aria for a soprano. And in that piece, we wanted to force ourselves as a metal band to go as far as we can into this quiet, subtle classical music. So, it was just two guitars doing swells, pretending to be like a string orchestra or maybe a subtle organ accompaniment. But for the rest, it's carried by the voice and by two string players. And that was another kick, really, especially in such a program. Imagine you come from some prog epic, like A Fool's Desire, that has like everything that extreme metal and prog metal have to offer. Then you play a super quiet, ethereal classical piece just to follow it up with the Fungi from Yugoth, which is like a pure death metal track, which ends in a jazz improv battle. And I guess you can see it in front of you, like when you're sitting there and coming up like, yeah, this is exactly what we're going to do. Let's try this. It's a lot of fun because you don't know if it's going to work, but it is going to work if you have the right musicians and the right public. And man, I couldn't be prouder that all these different things and all these kind of oddball ideas and things a little bit outside our normal lane we would do as Alkaloid now are being released as an album, because it's not something that we're going to do every year, and that there is a tangible evidence that this actually happened and that it's a live thing as well in today's spirit of faking everything. It has it started having a big meaning to us, and we are also very proud of it because it's a very real thing that actually happened. And I think it's not bad to put this out as well, to counter all the fake crap that we are fed by the spoon every day.
There are a few videos of your performance online, I think culled together from the different performances that you guys did for this.
Right.
And it really does seem like you guys are having a lot of fun. In particular, your classical collaborators.
Yeah.
I don't know, as classical musicians, how often they get to physically express themselves in their music, the way, because as metalheads, we get to headbang, we get to jump around, we get to do all kinds of stuff. But I feel like they seem to get they seem to get a kick out of being able to like physically express themselves.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And what I said about the right choice of people, of personnel for such a thing, it starts with the question, do you want to do this or not? And, if you have somebody eager to go into your world, it already tells you it's going to be great. In the first place, independent of their level or whatever. And we knew, there are stellar players that, have the technical and musical capacity to play anything you put in front of them. And this is how I know these guys. For some of them, I've written mountains of really brutal music, even though it qualified as classical music, but I knew they have the same fire that we have as metalheads. And again, if you go deep enough into the core of a type of music, you will find something kind of universal in it that can connect to, on an emotional level and on a taste level of what kind of rhythms you like, what kind of sounds you like, what kind of drive you like in a piece of music. It's really possible to connect also to these classical players, where I have to say classical, but some of them, like both sopranos, for example, also were in metal bands in the past. So they, many of them are a little bit hybrid as well, as we have always been. So rather than being taken aback by all the noise on stage and by the crazy tempos and by the chaotic way in which you have to perform this difficult music on a small stage playing with, brutal drums and guitars and stuff, they actually jumped at it because it's something out of the ordinary. And I know from many of them, they have orchestra jobs and whatnot, and they like play heavy music also there, because as I said, there's classical music that is as riffy and brutal as is metal. But if it's a classical concert, of course, you are a little bit restricted in how much you can headbang and how much you can express yourself.
Right.
And I mean, just the fact that they could put on a little bit different clothing, they really liked it. And I know Alkaloid will never look as good again as with all these hot ladies in awesome clothes playing like devils on their instruments. So that, that alone was a very good reason to do this project. And what you're saying about the pleasure of playing together, it's a profound thing, I have to say. And I'm saying this because, the last years have been very difficult for musicians, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of, what is happening to music, that it's starting to lose any tangible value for professionals. And I don't have to elaborate. You all know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's hard not to get depressed when you're at home and thinking about where everything goes, and that after 30 years in the business and 30 years of having a really good career, winning prizes, never having to look for work and whatnot, all of a sudden you are fighting to get kind of beginner's fees for one gig that takes you weeks to prepare. So it's hard right now for us. And since this is my livelihood, it's something I feel all the time. And especially the half year that I was writing all the notes for the Bach project, I was really quite isolated in my room, and I didn't have much contact to other people. I had other bad things going on, family deaths, dementia, problems to deal with. So I was at my lowest ever just a few weeks before the rehearsals for the Bach project started. And of course, I went through with it, but in that time, I didn't feel, okay, we're going to do an awesome project. It's more like, okay, we appointed that we were going to do it, so we have to do it. But if it was up to me, I would just dig myself a hole and bury myself and not come out for 10 years until I'm ready to face the world again. And a lot of us have to deal with these emotions nowadays. So the amazing thing was, once we got together, once we were all there on stage and all plugged in and everybody sounded and we started playing the actual music, it was as if, I don't know, something came from outer space and lifted me back up to spheres of joy. It sounds a little bit pathetic if I'm saying it, but I really felt it like that. It was such an incredible experience, which was still also a bit influenced by the fact that we didn't have concerts for a few years because of the pandemic. And so when a concert is happening nowadays, despite everything, it feels really special to me still. And especially this count, because it was the first time that we played with the two new guitarists as Alkaloid as well. So, that was new. We had never played together in that constellation. We had never played with guests. We had never played Bach. And, there were many, many, many firsts, and a lot of things could have gone wrong. But everybody had such a fantastic attitude. And this includes, the staff of the venues and the people from the Bach Festival. Like, everybody really felt like doing it. And the joy we had, and then especially also the public that came from, far and wide to see us from, all kinds of countries or even continents, just to see us dorks do our thing there. It was such an overwhelmingly positive, wonderful experience that was something that really revived me, and I think all of us. And it's as true for the public as for the musicians. Just this thing that you can share, where you have to get together, actually play together, not sit in your room and watch somebody's videos, which is fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I soon realized if you take away the pleasure of actually being together in the same room and sharing this ritualistic, dissolution in the music that we love, if that's not there, then, I might choose to do something else with my life, even though, 99% of the time I'm sitting alone in my room preparing these things. But occasionally you have to get together. And these, occasions, no matter how significant or not they are for the world or music history or whatever, who cares? It's for us and for everybody who was there. It was an incredible boost of positivity and a reminder why we do what we do. So yeah, that alone, besides all the artistic merits of the project, was essential and a fantastic experience. And still like that, we played a week ago, we played a couple of shows again, just metal shows, but this feeling how special it is that these things still happen and that you get to share what you love with wonderful people from everywhere. It's irreplaceable. You can't buy it with money. You can't replace it. You can't simulate it. You actually have to go out there and do all the work and do the actual thing to get that specific kind of pleasure.
something that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation was that it's not just as simple as replacing the instruments in going back and forth between classical and heavy metal. In choosing these three Bach pieces, what were the qualities that these compositions had that made them appropriate for this kind of performance, for being turned into heavy metal songs? Was it something about the tonality? Was it something about the speed and the technicality that made you think that these could be turned into heavy metal songs?
Absolutely. That was definitely a factor in the case of the harpsichord concerto. The live album has only the first two movements. There were three movements, but the full thing became too much for an album. So we decided to include only the first two movements. And then the third one on the album is the Agnus Dei, this aria for soprano, this very quiet piece, which I already explained a little bit.
Yeah.
The sound of it is magical, and I wanted to see, can we go even there as a metal band? So yeah, that had a clear function. And as for the harpsichord concerto, the first movement is a lot of 16th notes, fast notes, of course, classical, chord structures, because, Bach was one of the people who sort of helped to establish chords and the whole Western tonal system. And a lot of metal bands, especially the more virtuosic bands and the technical metal bands, and certainly the tech death bands, in the guitar solos, there's a lot of similarity to the times of Bach, when it's just, notes and notes and notes and notes and notes. Virtuosity is important, but also let's say the charge of the notes themselves, what the notes are transporting, is, related to each other, even in tech death. So yeah, I did see the first movement and the third movement of the harpsichord concerto by Bach as kind of an early proto-tech death, if you want.
Right.
So that angle was immediately clear. I just had to make sure that I don't overload it, because if you have three distorted electric guitars and Hannes on drums and Linus is a machine on bass as well, it becomes very full very quickly. So I had to reduce the degree to which the guitars are distorted. I had to use a bit more dynamics so that there's a little bit of space for the classical instruments, even in this very dense kind of music. But yeah, that was more or less straightforward. The second movement, which is the Adagio, the All Is Vanity, was a little bit different. Within Bach's full work, this harpsichord concerto, it's the middle movement. And if you have a very fast and busy first and third movement, usually the middle movement is a contrast. So it's quiet. Many symphonies have this as well. The first movement blasts, with all guns blazing. And the second movement takes it back so that it can explode again in the next movement. So it's this also sort of slow, quiet, but very dark piece of music. And I'm wondering, is there a way to turn this movement into something that is more like a song? So I made two choices that were relevant. One was that just listening to Bach's notes of the Adagio, I heard doom metal in it immediately. I mean, in Bach, it's very quiet. There's a lot of space between the notes and everything is kind of soft. But I thought, hey, if you play this in a doom metal way, the notes are as doomy as they're going to get. It could be Candlemas as well. So yeah, I turned it into a doom metal song. And of course, I needed some words for it, because I figured if there is singing going on, it's a lot easier to connect to certain music than to instrumental music, because, a lot of music lovers, they're not music themselves or whatever, they will not listen to a lot of instrumental music. Most people listen to songs. At the same time, I didn't want to mess around with Bach's notes, because, I cannot add better notes than he did. But I've found a little trick that hopefully is legitimate, which is that I put words onto Bach's notes, and I chose a text from a poem from the time that hopefully goes well with both what Bach wanted to do and with my idea of turning it into a doom metal song. That song, that poem is called All is Vanity. Es ist alles eitel in German. And in school they taught us this poem embodies the spirit of the Baroque times, meaning it was, in architecture, in art, it was very opulent times. The Baroque cathedrals are, loaded with details and sort of, heavy and bombastic. But in all this bombast and sort of celebration of earthly life, people also were very aware that they're going to die, because the world was coming out of, the dark ages that were dominated by religious metaphysics and, invented stories of what happens after death. It was transitioning into the age of enlightenment, which was the birth of science as well, where, people realized, but, whatever you believe about the soul, that your body is going to die. And this realization of the mortality and the finiteness of everything earthy led to a weird depression on the one hand, that, you are mortal and you're not going to last, but at the same time celebrating life with everything it has. And this all is vanity kind of this lyric, which, it's not a literal translation. I had to adapt it a little bit to the notes there were, but I think it's all right. The message hopefully stands. And altogether, to me, it perfectly represents what doom metal is about. Doom metal is also about, a certain hopelessness and death and the way everything is going to pass. So, I saw a very clear link that I wanted to use between, the doom of the 18th century and the doom that we talk about these days.
So this is more of a technical or engineering question. But you spoke about how with some of the acoustic instruments, there were challenges with making sure that they didn't get blown out. Were there additional challenges in the performance and making sure that the accordion and the violins were heard?
Yeah, it was a huge challenge, actually. And what we did, like for the 3 string players, for example, we gave them regular microphones, but also piezo microphones, which is something that you glue on the bridge or on the body, which picks up the vibrations directly from the wood. And the reason was that as soon as the metal band blasts, the noise from the other instruments in the regular string microphone was louder than what the actual violin played. So that means as soon as the metal band gets loud, we couldn't use the microphones that have the good string sound, and we were forced to use the piezo elements, which you can hear them, you can hear the violin, but it doesn't sound very good. It sounds. The direct comparison to just a regular, nice, good mic put in front of a violin is humongous. So we knew that the guys played incredibly. So it's not that. There was no problem with how people performed, even though it was very hard to hear everything on that stage, because it was a small stage, so you can imagine it's really, really noisy. But everybody's super professional, so we knew they're gonna play what they have to play, even if they don't get a good image of what the public hears, let's say. So this kind of blind flight is something that we professionals are unfortunately used to, because you can't always have perfect sound of your monitor. So that was okay, but it was a gamble that we took. But just like in terms of acoustics, we had this bleed problem that also, for example, the vocal mic, the singers are standing just a meter in front of the drums, and even though we put a glass cage around the drummer to keep the noise behind the wall, still there is so much bleed into the vocal mics that before you can start mixing that as a recording, I don't know what Hannes did to remove all the bleed from the other instruments from, for example, the vocal microphones. And same with the string microphones, but even the drum microphones ended up recording the drums in a bit of a weird way, because there was this glass cage around him. So, of course, if you hit a drum, the microphone picks up not only the skin of the drum, but also the echoes that scatter back from the glass cage. So even the straightest, simplest thing of, drum miking becomes a problem if the noise has no place to go. And this was the biggest challenge in the mixing of the album, because we saw that, live it worked, and it worked because we had a really good front of house engineer that knows both classical music and extreme metal. So he really made it work very well in the hall. But what ended up on the tape, so to speak, came with its own challenges. And we saw with certain tracks like Alter Magnitudes or Kernel Panic that the heavy parts rendered the strings so unusable that we couldn't even, start to prepare them for a live release. So also that limited a little bit what we could do. And for the tracks that are on the live album, believe me if I say that Hannes had to conjure up some dark magic to make it work. Because also the thing is, usually if you have separate tracks and somebody's a little bit late, the timing is a little bit off at something, which happens easily. You just you put where it needs to be, if it's a word that is a little bit off. But this we couldn't do because you hear everything else on that same track. So if you shift it, you hear immediately that something wasn't right. So yeah, it was difficult because also the project wasn't conceived as a recording project to begin with. I mean, it's great that we got some recordings out of it, but it was hard enough just to get it on a stage and to play the stuff live. So it was almost a bit an afterthought to get these recordings, and the same was true for the video. We had some friends that came and took photos and filmed a little bit, but it was not set up as a professional recording of the thing because it would have required more time. It would have required a bigger budget, all of which we didn't have. It was like we could just manage with what there was, only because everybody worked extra hard. So that's, we know that the album, like neither the album nor the live videos that we put out are perfect. And if we had the chance to plan it as a recording project, it would sound very different. But that was not an option, just simply because of time constraints and budget constraints. So what you hear and what you see now is the best we could make out of what we managed to put on stage and managed to capture from this kind of do-it-yourself, in-house family project, if you want.
So, by the time people hear this episode, Bach Out of Bounds will be out through Season of Mist Records. Morean, please tell everyone how they can order the new album. What's the best way to get it?
The best way to get it for us is that you go to our website, which is alkaloid-band.com. The page opens with our own shop, and you can order everything there. You can also find us through our Bandcamp page. So just go to Bandcamp and look for Alkaloid Metal. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. And of course, you can write to us through our website. So just look for Alkaloid or Alkaloid Band or Alkaloid Metal, which should lead you directly to each of our pages. And whoever wants to check out what I'm doing in the other times in my life that I'm not busy with Alkaloid, just find Morean, Morean, on either YouTube or Facebook or whatever, or you can Google my full name, Florian Magnus Meyer, or Morean Alkaloid. You will find my pages, well, for sure on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on TikTok, but there's a lot on YouTube and there's a lot on Facebook, and you can find all our members there as well. So you should be able to connect if you want, and we look forward to hearing from you.
So I just want to add, Season of Mist is releasing this on vinyl, which is, the vinyl version will be limited to 500 copies. I'm not sure exactly how many will be left by the time people hear this episode, but do you want to say anything about the vinyl version?
Yeah, it's a double vinyl because the album is an hour long. The artwork consists of live photos from the shows. And of course, we're very excited that we don't release it only as a CD, but also as vinyl. The CD is also limited to 1,000 for now, the vinyl to 500. I think you can still get it, but I'd be quick if you want to make sure you get one of those vinyls.
Morean, I really enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully we'll get to catch up on the next release.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure and good questions. Relevant talks. It's really nice. And whenever you want to continue, just reach out. We're always ready, and it's been awesome.
Thanks, Morean. Danke.
Okay. Talk to you next time. Ciao.